Hey, what's up, family? I know you are like, where in the world have I been? I missed you. It's been a while. And that's a whole nother video. But I will say this. I know what it's like to be swallowed up by a whale. So that connects us right to today's message. I got inspired by Dr. Dharius Daniels, who preached a sermon called The Breaking Point. And I'm going to put the link to that video in the description box. Please, please check it out. It is fire. It's fire. It's hot, and share it. So if you know me, you probably get text messages from me. I've shared that. Share it with someone else because it is absolutely a blessing. But what I'd like you to do first is take out your Bible. So whether it's on your phone, I have mine here, or a physical Bible, go to Jonah 1. I know many of us are familiar with this story, with the text of Jonah and the whale, Jonah fleeing from the Lord. So I'm going to read through some of it and I'll kind of paraphrase a little bit. And then I'm just going to get into some of the main points that Dr. Dharius Daniels made in his amazing sermon. All right, so here we go. Jonah 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah. And God told him, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. God was not happy with what was going on in Nineveh. But what did Jonah do? He ran. He ran away from the Lord, headed to Tarshish. Okay, he went down to Joppa where he found a ship bound to that port. And after paying a fare to get on that ship, he went aboard and he sailed to Tarshish to flee from the Lord. So he trying to get away from God and God's plan. He said, not me, not today. Then in verse 4, the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break apart. All the sailors were afraid, and they started crying out to their own individual gods. Now, what happens next? They start throwing stuff overboard because they're like, we have to lighten the load on this ship. Maybe that will help us survive this. Meanwhile, guess where Jonah's at? In the bottom of the ship. Sleep. So the captain goes down to him and says, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but if you got your text, you see it. He says to Jonah, how you going to be sleeping? How can you sleep when we are literally about to be thrown out of this boat? You don't feel this, the wind, the shaking, the water coming in. What's up? So the sailors get together, the men on that boat, and they start to cast lots because they're like, we got to figure out who's responsible for this storm. And they cast lots and Jonah's name falls out. So they go to Jonah and now they interrogating him saying, you tell us who is responsible for this. Who is making all the trouble? They ask him questions. What kind of work do you do? Where did you come from? Why are you here? And Jonah answers them and says, I am a Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and dry land. Dry land. Interesting. So Jonah just basically says, you know what? Just throw me over. Y'all throwing over cargo, throw me over too. He said, if you do that, the sea will become calm. And at first they were like, no way. We not about to murder this man. We just need to go over here and try to, wheel the little wheel or whatever they do on the boat. The sail, turn the sail, whatever. Just try to calm the boat down. And they couldn't do it. And finally they were like, you know what? God forgive us. We about to kill this man. He about to get thrown over. So they pray, they ask God for repentance, and they're like, we threw him over. This is what's interesting. It says, then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. Can you imagine what it was like for those men? Remember, our God wasn't their God. That's not who they was praying to. And God and Jonah told them who his God was. And the moment they threw him in the water, it calmed down just like that. And I love what it says next here. It says, at this time, men greatly feared the Lord. The fear of the Lord. And I'm going to talk about that when I talk about me and the whale in another video. But one of the scriptures that I've been meditating on is in Proverbs. I think it's Proverbs 1 or 2. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but the fool despises wisdom and instruction. So the fear of the Lord. Like, I thought I feared the Lord, but I do now. But just wanted to comment on that because I thought it was amazing that immediately they feared God. And who knows with those men, what happened with their belief after that. But anyway, so what happens now is Jonah gets thrown over, and in the split second, a whale, or it says in the Bible, it says a fish, a huge fish swallows Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of that fish, you already know, for 3 days and 3 nights. So I'm not going to get into chapter 2 but in chapter 2, this is where Jonah starts to pray. He starts to cry out. He starts to communicate with God and plead with God here. And in chapter 3, right before chapter 3 starts, it says that God commanded the fish, the whale, to spit Jonah up on dry land. And in chapter 3, Jonah goes to Nineveh, and it says the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. And I love when Dharius Daniels says to everyone, when he's preaching this sermon, he was like, how many of you need God to circle the block? Just to come back around for you one more time. Maybe you missed it the first time. Maybe you ran the first time. Maybe you were afraid the first time. But you're praying that God doesn't hold that against you and that he comes back around for you. I love that. So the word of the Lord came to him a second time and gave him it doesn't say this, but it gave him the same instruction. All right. So, and then he goes to Nineveh, and I'll talk about that in a second. All right. So let me get into just these nuggets and then we're going to wrap up. The first thing that I want to mention here. Oh, this is a good one. So Jonah was obedient. If you look at Jonah's track record, well, I don't know because I haven't read anything else about Jonah, but I'm going to assume that Jonah, for the most part, has been obedient in the past, that he's not a runner. But something happens here when God commands him or asks him to go to Nineveh. He knows what's going on in Nineveh. They are slaughtering Christians in Nineveh, cutting their heads off, doing all kind of crazy stuff. So in a moment of weakness, in a moment of humanness, if that's a word, Jonah is afraid. He's scared. So he doesn't believe that he's capable of fulfilling what God is asking him to do and that he will be safe. He's also not trusting God. So it says God trusts, so these are my notes. God trusts Jonah and has faith in him, but Jonah doubts God because he doesn't know what he's capable of. Jonah doesn't know what he's capable of, and he's not trusting God for what God can do. So trust is big in this. And I need to hear this message more than anybody right now. So I want you to make a note of that, okay? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. I think that's Proverbs too. Look at me. I'm on a roll. Okay. Jonah, when he first heard from God, he leaned to his own understanding, not God's. And that's why he ran, because he was scared. And I mean, can you blame Jonah? I don't blame him. He was scared. So, okay. So another big takeaway from this sermon was whenever God asks you to do something and there's a call over your life and God is speaking to you and trying to get your attention in some way, when you ignore God, when you do the opposite of what God is asking for you, you are going literally in the opposite direction. So when Dharius preached this, he basically said Jonah went down to Tarshish, whatever. Down. Whenever you are running away from God, you're headed down. And he also said, whenever you're running away from God, it is going to cost you. It's always going to cost you something. You're never going to win. Ultimately, you might have little small victories, what you think here and there and here and there, but in the end, it's not a win. It's always going to cost you something. It might cost you money. It might cost you time. It might cost you your values. It might cost you relationships. It might cost you a career. It might cost you a bigger opportunity. There is going to be a cost. So what he said basically was that Jonah had to pay to go in the wrong direction when he could have went in the right direction for free. Ooh, that's good. All right. Next point that I want to make is that when God is trying to get your attention, and I'm speaking to myself because I'm just reflecting on the last 6 months of my life. My God. Sometimes God has used up, and I feel this, God has used up everything that he can in your current situation to get your attention. Everything. And sometimes the last thing that he uses is the thing that you feel absolutely is going to break you. It's going to break you. Like, you could handle everything else. But this last one, this Hail Mary, it will bring you down to your knees, where Jonah was. Down in full submission, knowing God, just like is this a Cardi Cortez? No, it's not. Yeah, it is a Cardi Cortez. The song Lord Do It For Me. If you never heard that, please look that up. And he basically said, Lord, if you can't do this, it can't be done. But he's asking God, God, do it for me. Do it for me. And this is what Jonah's doing. So like I said, he'll use up everything to get your attention. The last thing is the Hail Mary. It's going to break you down, 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 down to Chinatown. I know, I'm in my well. But what he says here, and this is so good, the wind comes before the whale. So we talk a lot about him being swallowed up by the whale, but things happened before that. They did. One, he had to pay to go in the wrong direction. Two, God sent the wind. God sent the rain. God sent the movement, the action, right? He sent all these things. He's still trying to get Jonah's attention. And the last thing that he uses is the whale. But Jonah missed some things. So God prepared this fish. Oh, it's all good. All of this is so good. You just got to watch his sermon. Some of this is my stuff, but most of this is his. Okay. This whale. So let me just say this. The first time, I've been going through some stuff for like the last 3-4 weeks. The first week that I was going through this, I was angry with God. I was angry. I'm not going to lie. And I wasn't angry to where I was like, you ain't my God no more. But you know how it is. You like, why me? What did I do? I'm not a bad person. I don't deserve this. Lord, I have kids. You know, it was just all these things. And I was upset with God. I was angry with God about this whale. But what I realized now, 3.5 weeks later, God is not punishing me. He's not. And God wasn't punishing Jonah by putting him in that whale. And Dharius basically says, what if the whale is not punishment? What if the whale is grace? That whale didn't have to swallow Jonah up. Jonah could have just drowned. They threw him over. That's the end of that story. God's like, I'm still not giving up on you. Yep. And even though Jonah gets swallowed up by the whale, and you might be in a whale right now, Jonah was whole in the whale. The whale didn't chew him up, break his bones. he was whole. God kept him whole inside that well. Even though he kept him in the well, he kept him whole. So that's good. Another thing, when Jonah's in this well, and that's chapter 2, of course, when I talked about Jonah's praying. So he does 3 things in the well. He prays, he praises, and he gives a promise. So he sends up a prayer, a praise, and a promise. Now, Jonah's talking to God. That's what he's doing. 2 weeks ago, I still talk to God, but I was like where Jonah was, where I'm just like, God, please hear me. Please. Jonah's talking to God. Did God ever talk back to Jonah? Did God hear Jonah? Mm-hmm. Just because God doesn't talk back to you doesn't mean he didn't hear you. And one thing I will say, and I thought about this when Jesus was praying before the crucifixion, asking God to take this away from him, right? To remove the thorn, or however he said it. And I think I remember him going to God 3 times. He went once, then he went back, prayed again till he was blood coming out his head. And then he went the 3rd time. And when God didn't answer him the 3rd time, he said, not my will, but your will be done. He accepted it. So I didn't feel bad for a second, because I was asking God, like, he wasn't hearing me. Like, I'm praying every day for the same things. Like, maybe God was mute. He's not. So I realized the other day, like, don't pray that prayer no more. Don't ask for God. Don't ask God for that no more. He heard you. Okay? You have to trust that he heard you. So at this point, Jonah's talking to God. God doesn't talk back to Jonah. Who does God speak to? The whale. God speaks to our situation. That's what he communicates with. So you may not hear it, but don't worry. You will see it. So Jonah gets spit up, right? God speaks to the whale spits Jonah out on dry land. And then it says the word came to Jonah a 2nd time. Now, this, and I'm wrapping up, this mission was designed to take 3 days initially. Now, Jonah been in the well for 3 days. So basically the time it took him, he could have went on and listened to God and did what he had to do. He spent running. And when God came back to Jonah and spoke to him, he basically said, and I love when Dharius said this, he said, you still got to do it. You still have to do it. I'm coming back to you a 2nd time, but the mission has not changed. It's the same. And now Jonah is able to do in 1 day what would have taken him 3 days. And I also love how the preacher says, God doesn't necessarily give us the time back. You might have been running from God. You might have been doing your own thing and you feel like, man, I've lost a lot of time. But God is a redeemer. He redeems time. What does that mean? You might not get that time back, but he can maximize the time that you have left so that you capitalize on it. Jonah was able to do in 1 day what would have taken 3. And he said, he said this too. He said, time wasted isn't time lost. Somebody really needed to hear that. You have not wasted time. God can redeem it. Believe that. All right. So I think, so Jonah goes and he carries out this assignment. And what we start to see, I think I believe in even in chapter 4, is that Jonah is still working on himself. Like he goes to Nineveh, he does what he has to do, and then he gets mad at God. He gets mad at God after all that he's been through and the grace that God has shown him. He has the nerve to get upset with God. And I actually do want to read that part. Okay. So basically Jonah is upset. You read the text. Jonah is upset because God is being gracious and compassionate to the people in Nineveh. So chapter 4 says, but to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord and said, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? And now he just basically says, God, just kill me. Just take away my life. I don't even want to live. He said it a couple times, like, I don't even want to live. All this calamity out here. And this is what God said. God is so cold. He said, is it right for you to be angry? So he basically saying, you got your nerve. You have your nerve. The same compassion that I showed you when you was promising and praying and praising in that belly of that well is the same compassion that I give to someone else. And you got the nerve to be mad, to be angry. But it also shows the human side of Jonah too. Sometimes God brings us out of situations and there's still things that we got to work on and change. There is, Jesus is the only person who died with Jesus is the only person who died without unfinished business. Like he was finished, he was done. It wasn't nothing left for him to do. But for us, every day, there's something left for us to do. Every day, there's something for us to improve and to work on. And I love that we see the human side of this here. So I want you to know that no matter where you are, whether you're hearing from God and scared, or running from God after what you heard, or in a well, praying to God and asking God to get you out of it, wherever you are in your journey right now, I just want you to know this. God is preparing you for something greater than what's happening in your life right now. And as a matter of fact, somebody kind of told me this, and I feel this in my spirit. Who you are right now might not be in alignment with what God has for you. So he will use circumstances to develop us. I know with me, of course, I'll always have faith, but this faith I have right now is a whole nother level. And I know God is saying that's the kind of faith that's going to be required for this next level. And like Dr. Dharius said, the chapter 1 Jonah wasn't ready for what the chapter 3 Jonah, or 3 Jonah was. He was a different person, right? After going through what it was that he went through. So I want you to be encouraged. Trust God. Always pray, praise, and make a promise to God and keep that promise. But then when you don't hear from God, just know God hears you. And what he wants you to do is to be patient. To be patient, to trust him in his ways and not your own, right? And prepare yourself for what God has for you next. So I know I went a little bit long tonight. I appreciate y'all sticking with me. Again, please watch Dr. Dharius Daniels sermon. I'm going to put the link in the description box. It is absolutely a powerful message. God bless y'all. I love you, and I'll talk to y'all soon.